The 7th year of our marriage, Ethan gifted Claire, his first love, a sprawling field of roses. When I led the applause, Claire ran off with teary eyes. For this, Ethan publicly berated me, calling me stupid, malicious, and petty. That evening, Ethan and Claire admired the fireworks together on the rooftop. As the sparks faded, I didn't confront Ethan as I usually would. Instead, I quietly turned and walked down the hill. I had just finished a call with the divorce lawyer when Ethan showed up, his face cold. "Summer, you're leaving without a word? Just walking away like that?" That day, the Song family was hosting a banquet. The guests were all prominent figures, and I had been running around tirelessly, ensuring everything went smoothly. If Ethan hadn't publicly surprised Claire with his grand gesture, I wouldn't have left halfway. Seeing me remain silent, Ethan's gaze grew colder. "What exactly are you trying to pull?" For 7 years, I had always been accommodating to Ethan. Even when we argued, I was mindful of the occasion and never let it tarnish his reputation. But now, with just the two of us, I wasn't going to argue anymore. "I'm feeling dizzy. I'm leaving first." While mocking me for being dramatic, Ethan still drove his car to my side. As I got into the passenger seat, I noticed a pair of tiger and bunny plushies hanging from the rearview mirror. Ethan cleared his throat. "Claire insisted on hanging these childish things. She's been pestering me for days." I replied indifferently. "That's how young girls are." Ethan frowned. "The charm you asked for before, I didn't throw it away." "It should be," I cut him off nonchalantly. "Just drive. I'm tired." As the car rounded the third bend, Ethan suddenly spoke. "Tomorrow's the weekend. I'm free. I can go with you to visit your parents." In the past, hearing this would have made me immediately text my mom to prepare Ethan's favorite dishes. But now, I simply massaged my temples and declined coolly. "You rarely get time to rest. I'll go by myself." Ethan frowned, his lips parting slightly as if to say something more. Just then, Claire's sweet saccharine ringtone interrupted. Her weak voice came through, complaining about her recurring chest pains and how no one was there to massage her, leaving her unable to recover. Shortly after the call ended, Ethan glanced at his phone, which showed no new messages. He turned to me and said, "Something urgent came up. I'll come back to pick you up after I handle it." With that, he stopped the car midway up the hill, left me there, and drove off. For 2 hours, Ethan didn't return. My phone had died, and I couldn't hail a ride. I had no choice but to walk down the hill on my own. By the time I reached the bus stop at the bottom, my heels were rubbed raw and bleeding. That night, at 11:30 p.m., Ethan returned unusually early. He stood in the entryway for a few minutes, waiting for me to come and take his coat and bag, but I didn't. Pressing his lips together, he walked into the bedroom, surprised to find me already asleep. The next morning, I had just returned from the community clinic when Ethan blocked me at the door. Glancing at the bag of medication in my hand, he only asked, "Why didn't you make coffee today?" I casually lied, "We're out of beans. If you want some, you can order delivery." Hearing this, Ethan's expression turned cold as he walked into the kitchen. A short while later, he tossed a sandwich onto the table in front of me. I knew this was his way of offering a truce. 20 minutes later, Ethan emerged from the study to find the sandwich untouched and me about to leave. As the elevator doors opened, Ethan stepped in ahead of me. I intended to wait for the next one, but he impatiently pulled me inside. "What's taking you so long? I told you yesterday I'd take you." Thinking of the wounds on my feet, I didn't refuse Ethan this time. In the car, he retrieved a gift box from the glove compartment. "I had this custom made," he said. Inside was a pair of expensive butterfly-shaped earrings. I glanced at them briefly before politely returning the box. "They're too extravagant. I can't accept them." An hour earlier, I had seen Claire post on social media about her custom jewelry set. She'd joked about how someone, knowing she hated bugs, had thoughtfully donated the ugly butterfly earrings to stray dogs. Seeing me place the box back, Ethan slammed his hand on the steering wheel in frustration. "Summer, are you out of your mind? You didn't wait for me and insisted on walking down the hill, only to make yourself suffer. Who else can you blame for being so stupid?" When I was a child, I had a severe fever that left me prone to trembling and numbness when emotionally overwhelmed. Ethan knew this and would often berate me during arguments until I broke down, trembling and begging him to stop. Only then would he relent. But at this moment, I felt nothing. Not even a tremor in my fingertips. "You're overthinking," I said calmly. "I'm not blaming anyone." Ethan sneered. "Not blaming anyone? Then why did you reject my gift?" "Summer, my patience has its limits. Don't push it." Tucking my hair behind my ear, I looked at him innocently. "I don't have pierced ears. How could I wear earrings?" Ethan froze. It wasn't until I answered a call from my mom that he snapped out of it, silently starting the engine. Ethan had rarely accompanied me to my parents' house. When a neighbor in the hallway asked who the man beside me was, I smiled and said, "A friend." Hearing this, Ethan gave me a strange look. During dinner at my parents' house, our mutual friends group chat buzzed with excitement over a digital wedding invitation. Opening it, I saw a photo of Ethan and Claire kissing intimately. I casually gave it a thumbs up. Across the table, Ethan choked on his soup, a flicker of guilt flashing in his eyes. "Summer, the invitation." It was Claire who, out of boredom, had edited the photo for fun. The image was obviously photoshopped. I acknowledged it with a hum and continued eating. Ethan pressed his thin lips together. "You're not upset?" "Not at all," I replied, my expression calm as I looked at him. "Isn't it kind of creative?" Just as I finished speaking, my phone rang. It was a call from my lawyer. I went back to my room to take the call. When the conversation ended and I stepped out, I bumped right into Ethan. He pretended to ask casually, "Who was that?" "No one," I replied indifferently. "I have something to do later. You should head back on your own." After staring at me for a long moment, he walked over to my mother and whispered something to her. The next thing I knew, my mother was pushing me into his car. By the time I came back to my senses, Ethan had already driven me to a pool party. "Guess who?" Claire's voice rang out as she covered Ethan's eyes from behind, resting her chin on his shoulder. Ethan awkwardly pulled her hands away. "Aren't you a little old for childish games like this?" Claire pouted innocently. "I'm so much younger than Summer. What's wrong with being a little childish?" My phone buzzed repeatedly, but I ignored Claire's passive-aggressive remarks. After exchanging a few words, I walked to a quiet corner. Watching my retreating figure, Ethan frowned. When I returned to the party, Claire was holding a half-eaten French fry, her gaze dreamy as she tried to feed it to Ethan. The crowd around them cheered and egged them on. Leon, one of Ethan's close friends, came over to reassure me. "Don't be jealous, sis-in-law. It's just a game." I looked at him, puzzled. What's there to be jealous about? Hearing my response, Leon froze for a moment. He had once received a desperate late-night call from me, sobbing as I asked if Ethan was with him. He had also witnessed me, drenched in a torrential downpour, going from one club to another in search of Ethan and Claire. Now, looking at my calm and composed profile, Leon couldn't hide his surprise. Ethan, noticing me at last, quickly pushed Claire aside and walked toward me. "Summer, what would you like to drink? I'll get it for you." Taking the martini from Leon's hand, I took a small sip. "This is pretty good. I'll have one of these." Ethan's gaze flickered between me and Leon, his expression darkening for no apparent reason. Before he could act, Claire suddenly let out a shriek and threw herself into his arms. Someone had started spraying water guns around, and Ethan immediately shielded Claire behind him, coldly telling the troublemaker to stop. 5 years ago, Ethan had taken me on a boating trip with his friends. I didn't know how to swim, but Leon had insisted on dragging me into the water for scuba diving. I had turned to Ethan for help, but he had simply thrown me into the ocean. When I regained consciousness after nearly drowning, Ethan hadn't shown any concern. Instead, he had berated me in front of everyone. If you really can't swim, then don't pretend to be excited about going out to sea. You've ruined the whole vibe of the trip. Honestly, a useless woman like you is only good for staying home and cooking. Snapping back to the present, I downed the rest of my drink in one go and turned to leave. In 7 years of marriage, this was the first time I stayed out all night. Ethan spent the entire night sitting in the living room, waiting. The next morning, his eyes bloodshot, he confronted me. "Summer, do you think this is some kind of game?" I stifled a yawn. I was catching up with Jade. We lost track of time. Ethan laughed bitterly. "So happy that you couldn't even answer your phone, huh?" "My phone died. Nothing I could do about it," I said as I walked toward the bathroom. As I passed him, he grabbed my wrist. His lips curled into a cold smile, but he hesitated before speaking. "Summer, don't think I don't know what you're up to. Let me tell you, if this happens again," I finished his sentence for him. "If it happens again, you'll divorce me, right?" I paused, looking him straight in the eye. "Don't wait for next time. I'm ready now." Ethan froze, his back stiffening. Calmly, I pried his fingers off me one by one. "Give me some time. You know I need to prepare my parents for this." After what felt like an eternity, Ethan suddenly let out a low chuckle. I knew him well enough to understand he thought I was bluffing. After all, the last time he had merely hinted at a separation, I had knelt on a busy street, sobbing and begging him not to leave me, enduring the ridicule of countless passers-by. Sure enough, when Ethan looked up again, his eyes were filled with mockery. "Summer, one day you'll learn what it means to play with fire." He slammed the door on his way out. For the next 2 weeks he didn't come home. It wasn't until his mother, in an unprecedented move, reached out to me. "Summer, why weren't you at the gathering today?" "Ethan must have been too busy to tell you. Don't worry, I'll scold him for you. You have no idea how much your great-grandmother misses you. I'll send the driver to pick you up right now." I chuckled lightly. "If Ethan doesn't want me there, I won't go." Before I could finish, Ethan's voice replaced hers on the phone. He coldly insisted I at least make an appearance. I told him the truth. I was on vacation abroad and couldn't make it. Minutes after hanging up, he called me twice via video. I ignored both calls. Half a month later, I saw Ethan at the airport, holding a bouquet of sunflowers. When I tossed the flowers into the trash before getting into the car, Ethan stood there, stunned. After a long pause, he said bitterly, "Summer, weren't sunflowers your favorite? I treasured it like a priceless gem, carefully keeping it safe. But now I can only muster a dismissive smile. It's too heavy, my hand aches from holding it." After a moment of silence, Ethan, acting as if nothing had happened, asked me, "What do you feel like eating? I'll take you there right now. Let's just head back to the neighborhood. I'm not hungry." On the way home, Ethan had an urgent matter come up and had to stop by the office. When we arrived at the building, I planned to head back on my own, but he insisted on taking me upstairs with him. As the elevator doors opened, a cascade of glitter rained down on us. That's when I remembered it was Ethan's birthday today. Claire, holding a cake and leading a group in singing Happy Birthday, froze when she saw me. Ethan, who used to hate me showing up at his office, now had his arm around my waist, enthusiastically introducing me to a few of his key employees. To free myself from his grasp, I made an excuse about needing to use the restroom. Ethan, ever attentive, personally escorted me to his office. When I came out of the restroom, I noticed a photo on his desk, a close-up of him and Claire cheek to cheek. It reminded me of last year when I tried to take a selfie with Ethan during a family photo session. Before I could press the shutter, he snatched my phone, smashed it to pieces on the ground, and berated me in front of his family and mine. "I can't believe I was blind enough to marry someone as stupid and worthless as you," he had shouted. Now Ethan approached me with a piece of cake. Seeing me notice the photo, he stammered, "Summer, the family photo got damaged before, so Claire took it upon herself to put this one here. I just forgot to replace it." A notification popped up on my phone. The rideshare driver was waiting downstairs. I replied indifferently, "This photo looks better than the family one. Why bother replacing it?" As soon as I finished speaking, Claire burst into the office with a group of people. Giggling, she smeared frosting on Ethan's face and pretended to lick it off. I turned to leave, unfazed. Seeing this, Claire suddenly grabbed my arm, her eyes brimming with tears as she looked at Ethan. "Ethan, did I upset Summer again? Did I do something wrong?" I didn't disappoint Claire. With just one glance, I noticed the glaring red band tattooed around her ring finger. Half a month ago, I had seen the same red mark on Ethan's finger where he had removed his wedding ring. Ethan's face turned ashen. He opened his mouth to explain, but I cut him off with a light laugh and a single sentence that left him frozen in place. "The red string around your fingers is quite romantic. Honestly, I'm starting to root for you two." The room fell silent. Under the stunned gazes of everyone present, I calmly stepped into the elevator. When it reached the ground floor, I was surprised to see Ethan, panting heavily, having raced down the emergency stairs. "Summer, you've got it all wrong. Please don't go. Just listen to me," he pleaded, his breath ragged. My phone rang. I held up a finger to silence him and answered the call right in front of him. The confined, quiet space made it easy for Ethan to discern the voice on the other end. It was a man. But he was too preoccupied to care, waiting anxiously for me to finish the call so he could continue explaining. "Claire was dealing with depression recently," he said hurriedly. "The red string on my finger was just something I did to help stabilize her emotions. Summer, we've been married for so many years. Don't you know what kind of person I am? I'm begging you to trust me. There's nothing going on between me and Claire." I met his gaze. "Even if there is, it doesn't matter." Ethan stared at me dumbfounded. "What did you just say?" "I mean, whatever you do with other women has nothing to do with me. I don't care." Seeing his hands, which had been braced against the elevator doors, slowly drop to his sides, I walked past him as if he didn't exist. Under his utterly shocked gaze, I got into the rideshare car. As soon as I sat down, Ethan's calls started flooding in, over 20 in just 5 minutes. Annoyed, I blocked his number. When I returned home at a.m., Ethan was waiting. The moment I walked through the door, he pulled me into a tight embrace. His voice was hoarse like I'd never heard before. "Summer, thank God you came back. I'll explain everything to you. The only reason I tolerated Claire was because—" He stopped mid-sentence. He had caught the scent of men's cologne on me. Ironically, it was a fragrance he never wore. Ethan let go of me and stepped back, struggling internally for several seconds before he couldn't help but ask, "Where were you just now?" I shot back, "What does it have to do with you?" The night Claire returned to the country and threw a welcome party, Ethan came home at dawn with cherry red lipstick smudged on the collar of his white shirt, Claire's favorite shade. I pretended not to notice and casually asked who had attended the party. He grabbed my face, his tone mocking, and sneered, "What business is it of yours, housewife?" Now, I was simply giving him a taste of his own medicine. Ethan, however, stood there stunned, his eyes red and brimming with tears. He leaned against the wall and slowly slid to the floor. After washing up, I lay in bed for barely a moment before Ethan, having smoked 2 cigarettes in the living room, came into the bedroom. He lay down beside me, touched my face, and spoke with a bitterness in his voice. "I made an appointment with that marriage counselor you mentioned before. Summer, can we go together tomorrow morning?" About 5 years ago, I started begging Ethan to go with me to see a marriage counselor to address the communication issues in our marriage. How did he respond back then? Oh, I remember now. I turned my back, closed my eyes, and he said, "If you're crazy, go see a doctor yourself. Don't bother me. If you really can't take it, let's just separate." Hearing that, Ethan didn't come near me again. Close to dawn after a sleepless night, Ethan noticed me holding my phone and walking into the bathroom. 10 minutes later, unable to bear it any longer, he barged in and demanded, "Who are you chatting with at this hour?" When I ignored him and started heading to the living room, his face turned dark. He pushed me against the wall and cornered me. "Summer, give me your phone. I need to know if the person you're chatting with is a man or a woman." Before I could respond, Ethan's phone rang. At this hour, it could only be Claire calling. After answering the call, Ethan looked grave and told me, "Claire's depression has flared up. She's drunk and causing a scene on the rooftop of a bar. Summer, I've never told you this, but Claire's father died saving my life. I promised him I would take care of Claire. You're so kind, I know you'll understand." Ethan was in such a rush to leave that he buttoned his shirt all wrong. Before heading out, he squeezed my hand and gazed deeply into my eyes. "Be good and stay home. I'll take care of Claire and come back to you right away." 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Ethan didn't come back, nor did he contact me. At the hospital, after accompanying my mom for her checkup, I received a call from Ethan. I hadn't planned to answer, but my mom saw the caller ID and urged me to pick up. Reluctantly, I stepped aside and answered. His tone was gentle. "Summer, what are you doing?" I rubbed my temples impatiently. "If you have something to say, just say it." After a moment of silence, Ethan cautiously asked, "I can leave work on time today. I made a reservation at a restaurant. Can we have dinner together? I already have plans. You can eat by yourself. Is it with Jade? After your girls' night, I can come pick you up." Interrupting his incessant planning, I spoke coldly and deliberately. "Ethan, I'm not a child. I don't need you to pick me up and drop me off. And who I meet is my business. Why should I tell you? Stop asking so many questions. You're really annoying." With that, I hung up. When I returned to my mom's side, she immediately started urging me to go home and cook for Ethan. Sighing inwardly, I finally said, "Mom, Ethan and I have decided to get a divorce." Hearing this, my mom clutched her chest and cried, "If you dare get a divorce, I won't continue my treatment." In the past, hearing this would have thrown me into a panic. I would have begged her to take care of herself, and tearfully promised not to divorce. But this time, I was truly exhausted. "Suit yourself. It's your body. If you don't want to treat it, so be it." I turned and walked away. No matter how many times my mom cried out my name, I didn't look back. That night, when I returned home in the early hours, I saw the house filled with flower petals and balloons. Only then did I remember that it was our 7th wedding anniversary. Last year, on our anniversary, I waited all night at an upscale restaurant until closing time. Ethan finally showed up, late, with Claire. After spending the evening watching a movie with her, he tried to make it up to me by driving to the beach, claiming we could admire the moon together. That night, dressed in thin clothing, I silently followed behind Ethan and Claire, who always had endless things to talk about, for over an hour. Before parting, Claire cheerfully gave me an anniversary gift, a white antique clock. Ethan brought the clock home and hung it prominently in the living room without a second thought. The next day, I came down with a fever from the cold and couldn't get out of bed. Ethan, however, poked my forehead mercilessly and mocked me. "Do you really need to put on such a show, Summer? I never realized you were such a petty, jealous woman." Grinding my teeth, I got up to make him breakfast. On my way to the hospital for an IV drip, I saw Claire's social media post about the pain of unrequited love. Only then did I piece together why Ethan had been in such a foul mood that morning. When I finally returned home, Ethan rushed toward me as I was changing my shoes. "Summer, I've called you so many times. Why didn't you answer even once?" To be fair, his tone was incredibly gentle, as if he were trying to please me. But I gave him no satisfaction, my gaze cold and indifferent. My phone was on silent. Missing a call is normal. Are you stupid enough to ask about something so trivial? Just as I finished speaking, a call from a friend came through. Seeing the caller ID, I casually turned off the screen. When I looked up, I met Ethan's eyes, filled with unmistakable disappointment. "Summer, didn't you say your phone was on silent?" "Tisk, you're so annoying. Why do you have so much nonsense to say all day?" I tried to head to the bedroom, but Ethan grabbed my arm. After a long silence, he spoke hoarsely. "Summer, just tell me the truth. Are you seeing someone else?" I smirked. "If that's what you think, then sure." I had barely taken a few steps when I heard the sudden sound of glass shattering behind me. It was Ethan, throwing something in frustration. The glass of water shattered against the coffee table, breaking into countless pieces. The man's right hand was covered in shards. Seeing the undisguised disgust in my eyes, Ethan looked like a child who had done something wrong. He hid his injured hand behind his back and, holding back the sting in his nose, apologized to me. "Summer, I didn't mean to scare you. I'm sorry. I wasn't trying to hurt you. I just lost control for a moment." Before I could say a word, the sound of the electronic lock unlocking echoed through the house. I hadn't expected Ethan to give Claire the code to our home. Drunk and acting like she owned the place, Claire swaggered in. Ethan's face turned from pale to ashen. He was about to reprimand her for her lack of manners right in front of me, but when Claire, half closing her eyes, threw herself into his arms, his anger instantly turned to concern. "She's burning up," he told me, his voice filled with worry. "If I don't take her to the hospital, it could be life-threatening." "Summer, I swear I only see Claire as a sister. Please don't get upset with me because of her. Honey, I'm begging you." To get him to leave, I handed him the car keys with a calm smile. "Her health is the most important thing. Take her to the hospital quickly." Seeing my rare smile, Ethan was so moved that he kissed my cheek before rushing out with Claire. After they left, I went to the bathroom and washed my face repeatedly. Only when my cheeks were rubbed raw by the towel did I manage to suppress the disgust churning inside me. I packed a small suitcase, placed the divorce papers I had prepared on the coffee table, and moved to a more luxurious, secure villa in the suburbs that was under my name. It wasn't until noon the next day that Ethan noticed half of my wardrobe was empty. He came to the villa to look for me several times, but I refused to see him every time. After that, Ethan started appearing frequently in Claire's social media posts, which were full of smug displays of affection. While Ethan and Claire flaunted their relationship without restraint, I spent the happiest and most peaceful 2 months of my life. I had everything I needed, slept until I naturally woke up every day, and did whatever I wanted. Occasionally, friends would visit, and we'd spend entire evenings happily reminiscing about old times. A full medical checkup revealed that my previously precarious health was visibly improving at an astonishing rate. On the day of our college reunion, I couldn't stop smiling, until I saw Ethan standing at the entrance of the banquet hall, looking around, with Claire trailing behind him. I didn't need to guess to know that my mother had told him where I'd be. I glanced at him once, and then continued chatting with others as if nothing had happened. Suppressing his anger, Ethan walked up to me. When old classmates asked who he was, I simply said, "I don't know him." That one sentence was enough for Ethan to grab my arm and pull me up from my seat. His eyes reddened as he said, "Summer, this is the last chance I'm giving you. Tell them who I really am." I shook off his hand, frowning slightly. But before I could respond, a deep, teasing male voice rang out. "Summer, don't be shy. After leaving me, you married so well. Why would you be embarrassed to introduce your wealthy husband to us?" The man speaking was Morgan, my first love, as all our old classmates knew. What they didn't know was that Morgan had recently returned to the country, and I had personally picked him up at the airport. That night, the unfamiliar cologne Ethan smelled on me was from Morgan's coat. Ever since Morgan learned from Jade that I was getting divorced, he had been calling and texting, asking to see me. However, today's reunion was only the second time I'd seen him since his return. Looking at Morgan, who reeked of alcohol, I said flatly, "You're drunk. Stop talking nonsense." Morgan let out a derisive laugh and looked at Ethan with mock sympathy. "Why are you glaring at me? I'm the ex she dumped because her mother didn't like me. And you, well, judging by the look on your face, it's clear you're next. We're in the same boat." Ethan's fists clenched tightly at his sides. Not wanting a scene, I stepped between them and tried to calm Ethan down. "He's drunk. Don't stoop to his level." "Drunk? This man is clearly your lover." Claire, who had been holding back for a long time, finally couldn't resist sneering at me. "Summer, I underestimated your ability to seduce men. No wonder you suddenly wanted to divorce Ethan. Turns out you'd already lined up your next target, you shameless." "Shut up." For the first time in her life, Claire was yelled at by Ethan. She trembled in shock, her eyes wide with disbelief as tears welled up. But Ethan didn't spare her a single glance. His eyes, full of cold anger, were fixed on me. "Summer, I want to hear it from you. Tell me you have nothing to do with him. Just say it, and I'll believe you." Unwilling to waste my breath, I was about to leave this mess behind when Claire suddenly lunged at me, grabbing at my fitted dress and screaming for me to admit to cheating. Morgan was the first to kick her away. Supporting me by the arm, he draped his coat over my shoulders and anxiously asked if I was okay. Morgan didn't even have time to get a reply from me before Ethan suddenly grabbed him by the collar and started throwing punches without a word. I had never seen Ethan so silent and unhinged. Everyone could tell he genuinely wanted to beat Morgan to death. Yet Morgan seemed equally unhinged. Despite being pummeled, he managed to sneer through bloodied teeth and taunt Ethan. "You really think she loves you?" The moment I came back, she braved the storm to pick me up. "Oh, and wasn't that your birthday?" Tisk, tisk. "Even if she didn't get back together with me, I'm still more important to her than you, a useless, raging fool." Seeing the two men continue to fight, it was clear something terrible would happen if no one intervened. Several male classmates finally managed to pull them apart with great effort. I walked straight to Morgan without hesitation and used a tissue to wipe the blood from the corner of his mouth. Ethan, who had been struggling fiercely just moments ago, suddenly deflated like a punctured balloon and slumped into a corner, motionless. The blazing fury in his eyes disappeared in an instant, leaving his lips so pale that I wondered if he needed medical attention. In the end, the ambulance came, but it wasn't for Ethan or Morgan, it was for Claire. Morgan had kicked her in the stomach, causing a ruptured ovarian cyst and severe bleeding. She needed emergency surgery. 2 days later, Morgan sent me an apology message. He admitted he had been drunk and lost control, doing something unforgivable. He wanted to apologize to me in person and take me out for a meal. I didn't reply, and he wisely didn't press further. A few days later, my mother called, begging me to come home and visit her. Even though I anticipated Ethan would be there, I decided to go. It had been over a week since I last saw him, and he had grown so thin that his already sharp jawline now looked like it could cut glass. During dinner, Ethan kept placing food onto my plate, while my mother looked at him with satisfaction and praised him as a one-in-a-million son-in-law. Hearing this, I put down my fork and spoke directly. "Mom, Ethan and I have already started living apart. I'm definitely going to divorce him. If you're really willing to threaten me with your life over an outsider, then I'll have no choice but to cut ties with you." The atmosphere at the table froze instantly. After a moment, my father sighed and helped my mother, who was so weak she needed blood pressure medication, back to her room. Ethan gave me a bitter smile. "So, you're really determined to leave me?" I ignored him and went back to my room to pack my personal belongings. While I was sorting through my things, Ethan knocked on the door. After I allowed him in, he entered with a plate of sliced peaches. As I sat on the edge of the bed eating the fruit, he knelt at my feet, holding my knees, and looked at me with a serious expression. "Summer, is there really no chance to save this?" he asked. I know I was wrong. Before I could ask what he thought he had done wrong, he began murmuring to himself, listing every hurtful thing he had ever done to me. As he spoke, his voice gradually broke. There were so many wrongs that even if I gave him the entire night, it wouldn't be enough to recount them all. Now, the only thing Ethan could do was beg me with a humility I had never seen before, his bloodshot eyes pleading. "I won't get involved with any other woman again, not even the daughter of someone who saved my life. I swear I'll change. Just give me one last chance. I'll do anything you ask, okay? Please, Summer, don't leave me. These past few weeks, every time I think about you divorcing me, my chest hurts so much I feel like dying." When he mentioned dying, I couldn't help but recall the day my grandmother had a sudden stroke and was on the verge of passing away. I had called Ethan dozens, maybe even hundreds of times, leaving voicemails where I sobbed and begged him to come to the hospital, even if only for 5 minutes. I desperately wanted the grandmother who raised me to meet the grandson-in-law she had always longed to see, but Ethan never showed up. Later, I found out he had been too busy shopping with Claire at the mall that day. I would never forget the day of my grandmother's funeral. Seeing me cry so hard I nearly fainted, Ethan coldly told me, "Everyone dies. It's not a big deal. Stop acting like a clown and embarrassing me." Finishing the last piece of peach, I looked down at him. "Ethan, it's just a divorce. Who are you trying to impress with this dramatic act? Do me a favor and stop disgusting me." I stood up and walked toward the bookshelf, but before I could take more than a couple of steps, Ethan grabbed me tightly from behind. I felt his tears soaking into my shoulder. Gently, I took his hand, removed his wedding ring, and held it up to show the red mark it had left on his finger. "Believe me," I said. "Claire is your true love. Look, you really love her. You and she are meant to be." After a moment of silence, Ethan slowly let go of me and walked out without a word. 2 minutes later, I heard my mother scream. When I stepped out of my room, Ethan was coming out of the kitchen, his face as pale as a ghost. He held up his left hand, blood pouring from it, and looked at me with trembling eyes. The ring finger was gone. "Summer, I know you're a clean freak. Is this enough? If not..." I interrupted his rambling with a calm and detached tone. "Ethan, even if you kill yourself right in front of me, I'm still divorcing you." Ethan finally fell silent. He stood there, motionless, as if numb, while my parents trembled as they bandaged the wound on his hand. I don't know how much time passed before he let out a low sigh, forcing a nonchalant expression as he nodded at me. "All right, I understand." The day we went to the courthouse to finalize the divorce, I noticed Ethan hadn't reattached his severed finger. A year after the divorce, I finally earned my helicopter pilot's license. With a terrified Jade in tow, I soared into the sky. Even though she was scared out of her wits, Jade couldn't suppress her gossipy nature. She brought me the latest news about my ex-husband as I continued my nomadic lifestyle. "Good thing you were smart enough to leave when you did." The Song family just got caught up in the biggest financial fraud scandal in the industry. Forget Ethan, even the most respected elder in his family got arrested. Hearing this, I chuckled. And who was it that called me stupid back then, telling me to stay married for the money no matter what? Ugh, plans never keep up with change, okay? But I've got to say, your flying skills are pretty impressive. Hey, don't show off on purpose. I'm not ready to die yet. Stop screaming. Look to your left. The vast, untouched beauty of nature silenced both Jade and me. A helicopter, carrying 2 aimless women living in the moment. Marriage, love, men, worries, none of it mattered in the face of boundless freedom. Whether you're a man or a woman, as long as you know how to love yourself, you can find true freedom.